So, Jack, I wanted to have you on because something feels wrong with this Russia-Ukraine situation. And it seems like everybody is prepared. If I were a fiction writer, I would be looking at all of these things that are happening, and I would say, yeah, it's just, I'm doing a little foreshadowing. They're starting to build up for war. They're letting people know. I'm letting the reader know. It just seems like we're going places that I don't think would be a good place to go. As a fiction writer and somebody who lives in this world, and I love talking to fiction writers, especially about geopolitical things, because you can't write things that don't make sense because nobody would believe it. So you have to be based in reality. As a fiction writer, where do you think we're going?
Well, if I'd written what is actually happening in the world today, whether it's Russia, Ukraine, it's a withdrawal from Afghanistan, whether it's our own country right here, if I'd written these things 10 years ago, it wouldn't be a political thriller. It would go in the dystopian thriller category, perhaps even the science fiction type of a category.
I don't think people would 10 years ago. I think if you would have written what's happening today 10 years ago, you would have been laughed at. I mean, nobody would buy the book, and I think people would go, that's ridiculous. It would never happen.
Exactly. This could never happen in this country. It's just too unrealistic. That's what the reviews on Amazon would say. But these things are happening. And in fact, when we look just at Ukraine and Russia, you didn't have to be a genius. You didn't have to be a geopolitical strategist to look at it, apply some common sense to NATO, Ukraine, and Russia, and predict what was going to happen. In fact, my second book, True Believer, I have a black flag type, false flag type of an operation to get Russia to invade Ukraine as part of the storyline. And I just studied the situation and needed to figure out how to make that happen. And lo and behold, that has now happened. But in the research that I did, that really was, you could see that coming because of the decline of the ethnic Russian population since the end of the Cold War. Right. And really, they could only field an army up to about 2022. And then they were going to have to invade Ukraine because that has the largest population of ethnic Russians outside of Russia. So for our senior level leaders not to come to that same conclusion after looking at it with a little bit of common sense is it shouldn't be shocking, but it is, because we rely on those leaders to make those good strategic decisions, and they have proven time and time again that they're incapable of doing so.
So wait a minute. So you say that the reason why they're having a hard time is they can't get more troops. And you're saying that that's one of the reasons why you think they invaded Ukraine, so they could have ethnic Russians to fight?
That's right. So it's just looking at those numbers, and you really have about 2 generations of ethnic Russians being a population that can sustain a military, but in much smaller numbers past 2022. So in 2014, Peter Zehan wrote a book called The Accidental Superpower, which looks at geography, looks at demographics in world history when it comes to nation states and world powers. And that's the conclusion that he came to in that book, which is one of the things that I used in that second novel. But there of course are supporting factors, but that's a big one. And that also ties into the nuclear question, because if you have someone who believes that their population, their country is not going to be around in 2 generations, and they can't even field an army past right about now, well, it makes using maybe a tactical nuclear weapon, at least threatening to do so, but maybe even using it a little more likely, because they're an animal in a corner, and it's fight or flight, and it's survival. It's not, they don't look at it as an option, as, hey, if we do this, we don't do this. Well, hey, if we don't do this, we're dead anyway. So we have to put ourselves in the enemy's shoes and to anticipate what they're going to do. We continually do not do that in this country for whatever reason.
I got to tell you, that's some of the best commentary I've heard on what's happening in Ukraine already, and we've just been talking in just a couple of minutes. I haven't heard any of that. I've heard about the lack of military, but I had no idea that we knew this from the get-go. So when you have this situation and you have Putin, I'm sure you've done enough research just for your own novels on Putin and how things work over there. A couple of questions. first, they think he's sick, may have cancer. They're saying that maybe he's going under the knife and will be, under, and they don't know how long he will be incapacitated. If I'm Putin, I'm wondering if I'm going to be safe when they put me out, or if they might accidentally turn that knob up a little bit.
Oh, yes. And this was something during the Cold War that was at the forefront of senior level Russian officials' minds when they had to go under the knife, when they had to be put under. And they had security in those rooms, not just because of an assassination or something along those lines by a doctor that might be on the CIA payroll or just a rival in the political or military space, but because coming out of that anesthesia. So when they're coming out of that, there's a certain time period where you're not really very lucid. And for those who have been under the knife know what that feels like. And you're coming out of that, and, well, maybe a doctor on the CIA payroll can ask you a few questions at that point in time and filter that back to the CIA. So that was something during the Cold War that was at the forefront when any of those guys would have to go under the knife for a medical procedure. So I am sure that Putin is thinking about that. And, of course, he knows his history much better than we do, history of coups in Russia. It's not infrequent when we look at world history. So I'm sure that he's thinking about that and surrounding himself with people he thinks are trustworthy to ensure that either he's not killed during that time frame or is not asked questions during that time frame about his strategy vis-a-vis Ukraine or the rest of the world, or his intent to use or not use nuclear weapons.
Do you have any idea who would replace him? Let's say he dies on the table. Do you have any idea?
Nope,
how that even
not.
works?
There's always a military leader waiting in the wings, it seems, when we look at but who that is, I am not sure. In these situations, or just when you're looking at authoritarian dictatorships or countries like that, senior level leaders oftentimes are not getting the best information because it is not healthy to bring that bad news to a dictator, because oftentimes it's off with your head or off to the gulag. So it's a strange position to be in. Obviously, we saw that with our war in Iraq, where Saddam thought he actually did have a capability that he did not, and Putin is probably in that same position.
What do you make of the story? It came out, I think, yesterday. Pictures of what they call the flying Kremlin. It is a plane that they haven't seen it in the air, I think, since 2010 or 2011. And it's been flying around Russia, and it is the nuclear plane. If something needs to go on, we have Air Force One, that everything can be run from that plane in case of a nuclear war. Do you think that's just telling that? Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, that seems interesting. I didn't see that story, but oftentimes these things are done to just send a message, and they might just to say, hey, we have this capability, and to get us to take or not take a certain action. So for Putin to say he's moving nuclear weapons into a certain position, well, they're probably already there. Or if this plane is flying around, if the Russian military. If their capabilities are what we've seen in Ukraine thus far, then we overestimated, as did a lot of those senior level generals, probably because they didn't want to get their head lopped off by saying they weren't as capable as they had been projecting or advertising. But flying a plane like that probably is the same thing as saying, hey, we're moving nuclear weapons into a certain position just in case we need to use them, so that it sends a message to the West to discontinue support of Ukraine or get us to take a certain action.
So how serious do you think this nuke thing is? We've all grown up, without this fear of nukes. I grew up in the time, you might have too, where, we feared what Russia might do, and then it went away. And now, are we really that close to some sort of a nuclear explosion on Earth?
I mean, the first question is, and I did grow up during that time as well, and we thought with the end of the Cold War that, hey, our main threat now is the proliferation of some of these weapons going to rogue nation states or super-empowered individuals or terrorist organizations or that sort of a thing. But now we're back with a state-on-state, nation-on-nation
Do you think it's serious?
Well, first the question would have to be, hey, do they have the capability? And the answer to that question is yes. They have about 6,000, both tactical and strategic nuclear weapons. Strategic meaning they're gigantic and fly towards us. Tactical meaning you use them on the battlefield. A lot smaller, but still huge when compared to something like Hiroshima or Nagasaki, something like that. But we have a lot less, but with nuclear weapons, it doesn't really matter how, 1,000 here, 1,000 there. But when we add all of NATO's nuclear weapons and Russia's, it's about the same, give or take. It's just shy of 6,000 when we add all of NATO nuclear weapons to Russia's. But in this case, it's interesting in that if they did do something like that, we have this China, we have that side. So it would make it a lot harder for China to support Russia if Russia uses even a tactical nuclear weapon on the battlefield. So that's an interesting kind of connection here, because China is right now Russia's greatest ally, militarily, trade-wise, and there's a lot of incentives for this to stay connected, and using a nuclear weapon would make that a lot more difficult.
We're talking to Jack Carr, the fiction writer, the author of In the Blood, which is out right now. Also, one of his other books, The Terminal List, is coming out soon on Netflix as a series with Chris Pratt. We'll continue our conversation here in 60 seconds. So I just want to war game one more thing with you, and that is China. I was just reading something. I can't remember where I read it this morning. But some analysis that the American dollar is going to lose its reserve currency status, in the coming days, months, years, whenever. And China is making a move to basically have a multi or bipolar powered world. Japan looks like it's falling apart economically. We're not doing so great. Europe's not doing so great. There's a war going on. If this thing spirals out of control, what's to stop China from taking Taiwan and then just gobbling the world?
Right. So they were obviously looking very closely at what was going to happen with Ukraine and Russia. That didn't happen as fast as most of our strategic level thinkers, leaders, talking heads anticipated, which was about 3-4 days. Russia's going to roll through Ukraine. And a lot of that is due to Zelensky. And I still am curious as to why Russia did not decapitate that government ahead of time, take out the leader first. And I think it's because they thought, this is just an actor, kind of like Ronald Reagan as he first started into politics, and they discounted how he could galvanize both his country and the world against Russia. So I think that was a strategic level mistake, and they should have anticipated that one. And we thought the same thing. We offered him refuge. We said, we'll take you out of the country. And the way that was asked and the way that was talked about was so casual. It seemed as though we just thought, for sure, the leader of the country is going to pick up and go. And Russia probably thought the same thing, but that did not happen. And now we have the situation that we have now, essentially a war of attrition. And we'll see how that ends up. But China and currency, that is a major play here and a major component of this that no one is talking about. So I'm glad you are. And China can look at things, obviously. They look in decades, they look in centuries. Yep. We look at things in 4-year election cycles, maybe 8 years for the real deep thinkers among us. But China can take a breath. And they can see what happened in Ukraine. They can take a breath on Taiwan, and they can look at this long term. And that is the advantage that they have over us. So they have their problems too. They have population problems, the one-child policy and all that coming to fruition. There are lockdowns, there are mandates. They have a lot of issues to deal with as well internally. But they can deal with those issues and take a breath on the strategic front, because we're doing a pretty good job of destroying ourselves from the inside right now. So a little strategic patience on their part really plays into their hand.
Talking to Jack Carr, the author of In the Blood and The Terminal List, which is coming out on Netflix soon. I own the Paramount Studios here in Dallas. It was an old movie lot back in the 80s. And I have an old ship that was used in a miniseries back in the 80s, and it was Winds of War. You're really now in the the best time to be a writer, because now these movies can be made in episodes and they don't bastardize the book usually.
Wow, that's amazing that you have that, and I've been there on Chad Prather's show, so I've been in the back rooms there.
Oh my gosh,
some of the things that you have, and it was amazing.
Let me know next time you're here. I'll take you on a tour and show you some of the cool stuff we have.
Thank you. You have a lot of amazing things there. And Winds of War, that's an incredible book, and if more people read that and War and Remembrance, and that was their gateway into nonfiction, studying history to hopefully apply those lessons going forward in wisdom, we'd all be in a better place.
Jack Carr, In the Blood is out right now and coming soon, The Terminal List to Netflix. Please, Jack, let me know next time you're in town. I'd love to take you on a quick tour. God bless you.